folks who don't know me, my name is Benjamin Bergen. I'm the president of the Council of Canadian Innovators. We're a business council that's a bit unique. We work with only domestic Canadian headquartered companies, meaning we don't allow foreign multinationals to sit within the portfolio of the work that we do. So there's no IBMs, Googles, and those folks that participate in the work that we do. And what also makes us unique as an organization in Canada is that we don't take money from government. We're 100% funded by tech companies and by leaders in the ecosystem. And so the work that we do really looks at how do you advocate for a better tech ecosystem, not just for one company, but really for all Canadian headquartered companies that are trying to scale and grow. And so what pulls us here today really is the federal budget. A budget which kind of at first blush might look like it was positive for innovators with a couple of particular pieces. But when you begin to dive into it, and when we began to hear from innovators about what it really meant, we saw lots of concern. And really, it was the capital gains piece that really had a lot of leaders having a big fear of what it meant for Canada, what it meant for Canada's long-term prosperity in terms of being able to scale and grow technology companies here, and how it would ricochet not just for investors, founders themselves, but also for highly skilled workers that are help building these companies. And we at the council put together a letter, Prosperity for Every Generation, as really a rebuttal of the government in terms of what they've put forward. And we've been overwhelmed by the amount of support that we've seen for that letter. So if you haven't signed it, please do sign it. Please share it. Being able to build a response and an ecosystem that can really engage with government is critical, and it's really critical at a time like this. And before we just kind of pull it over to our fantastic panelists who have been outspoken, who have been helping drive the conversation, I think the one thing we'll also bring into today's discussion, probably closer to the end, is also how can you as individuals be involved in responding to the government and some of the decisions that they're making around our economy, because things are not good here in Canada. We've had economic stagnation for the last 8 years. Real wages are declining, and we're now 25% poorer than the Americans. And you can't have a strong country, you can't have a strong healthcare system if you don't have a strong economy. And so with that, I'm going to pull it over to our three panelists who are building successful companies, who are building Canada, and really, the reason why we, the council, exist. So I'm going to pull Rebecca from Dealmaker into this conversation, Daniel from Coho, and Stephanie from Tealbook. So why don't we start with the three of you just explaining, who you are. You all have, amazing careers. Some of you have been top 40 under 40, headlined in the Globe and Mail. But tell us about yourselves, your company, and the state of the ecosystem and what it means to be trying to create a tech company in Canada right now. Rebecca, I'll start with you.
Okay, sure. Happy to kick it off. Thanks for having us. Thanks to CCI for organizing this. Really excited for the discussion today with everybody here. It's so invigorating to be among the innovators of Canada in a country we're passionate about. So I'm CEO, co-founder of Dealmaker, been at it just over 6 years now. We've done some amazing growth over that time, really helping entrepreneurs fund their businesses through digital capital raising. So easy way to explain it is, if you remember the Green Bay Packers offering 2 years ago, they're a fan-owned NFL team. We set up their online store. The fans came in, bought shares in the Green Bay Packers, and they raised $65 million to build their new stadium. So we're really making online capital raising mainstream for new age entrepreneurs who want a different way to capitalize their business.
Amazing. And whereabouts are you based?
I'm based in Toronto, practiced law on Bay Street for over 10 years. No one hold that against me, please.
No, that's great. Thanks for telling us more. Stephanie, and then we'll go to Daniel.
Hi, thank you so much for including me. I definitely signed the list when it came through, signed it right away, because I'm also an investor with Fresh Founder and making small angel investments. So definitely feeling the impact. So I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Tealbook. The easiest way to explain it, we're sort of the Zoom info, but anything to do with the buy side of a digital enterprise. We've been collecting data to provide better information on the suppliers that are customers, which are typically Fortune 1000. They have in the thousands of businesses that they do business with for goods and services. And so we've been using AI for about 8 years now to collect information and be able to allow our customers to syndicate better quality data into their system. So we're catering to supply chain, procurement, finance, compliance, third-party risk, even revenue teams that are looking to optimize the spend data and the relationship with suppliers to build pipeline or negotiate with their customers. We're based in Toronto. We've raised a few rounds of funding. Our last round was a Series B 2 years ago. We raised 50 million US. And we're based in Toronto, but we do have quite a bit of footprint in the US from our staff perspective. We're quite remote, and I'd say 95% of our customers are in the US, and the majority of our investors are US based as well.
That's helpful. Thanks, Stephanie.
Awesome, folks. Thank you for having me. My name is Daniel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Coho. We have built basically, we're not allowed to call it a bank, but for our colloquial purposes, we'll call it that. It's the leader in this space. What we do, we're very focused on the sort of mass market of Canada. So we pay a higher rate of interest. We don't charge the traditional bank fee structure. We help people build and improve their credit history, a bunch of stuff like that. We have about 1.5 million Canadians signed up on the core product. And then we also power some folks with some of the infrastructure we built, like Wealthsimple and others. So we do have a smaller kind of B2B business. About 300 employees, most of which are based in Canada. And then the executive team is kind of 2/3 in the States, and we're distributed as well. Happy to be here. And thank you, Benjamin, for all the advocacy you've been doing. And you've been a very vocal part of the narrative. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks. And obviously, thanks for joining. Obviously, 3 great founders doing dynamic things, here in Canada, trying to build up the country, build up companies. Folks, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. There will be time later for those to be asked. We'll try and bundle them together. And the CCI team will also respond as they see fit if they can help answer some questions. But let's start and just open it up. And I don't need to be a gatekeeper in terms of asking each other questions. You guys can spar, fight, do what you want with each other as well. But where are we at? What's going on? Why did everyone lose their shit over capital gains? Talk to me.
I can jump in and just maybe say that, more recently, I was sort of reminiscing or thinking when I was an early stage company in this market, somewhat it would be a bit easier because we raise at the hype of the market. So that presents definitely some different challenges. It's had this envy for early stage companies because they're starting from scratch in a market where they can really pace their growth differently than what certainly we had to pivot from. But then this came out, and I'm like, actually, it would be quite hard because even as an investor in Fresh Founder, and we're hearing a lot from the investors of Fresh Founders, is just that they're, it's definitely cut significantly the appetite to be able to invest in early stage companies. And I think you mentioned that in the discussion today, just how that impacts stock options for employees and the incentive, right? And we definitely have an option pool. Every employee at Tealbook has, options in the company. And a big part is the upside and how we think it can be life-changing for employees if they put hard work and they create value for the business. So definitely some challenges.
So from what I'm hearing, it's a bit of risk reward, a bit of what does it kind of mean, long term. Sorry, Dan, I cut you off.
Yeah. So I think that the tax is symbolic. I don't think it's intellectually honest to say at 50% marginal tax rate, we'll have some amount of entrepreneurs, and at 2/3 everybody's going to leave. Some folks will leave, and there is a marginal diffusion that happens when that stuff happens. I think that, and so I was both critical of the government and critical of my fellow founders who said that people are going to leave. I am much more concerned. And when I say it's symbolic, I think that it's symbolic because there is a pretty big drift, I think, between how this government is viewing how to stimulate the economy versus how I think founders and builders and people in the business community are. And I think that's virtually represented in every data point. So government employees have grown 40% since 2020 or since 2016, right? That's a real drag on the budget. We're running a $50 billion deficit that I'm worried about. GDP is per capita is up 2% in 10 years, right? like you play that tape forward and you have a very different set of opportunities for the next generation of Canadians. And so I think that was part of the backlash. And then part of the backlash was just like, I think in the framing of it, which is that the risk are not paying, or the wealthy are not paying their fair share. I think directionally everybody who's wealthy is happy to wants good schools and good roads and like is happy to pay their fair share. I think that it's more of a disingenuous framing that this is like only going to impact the top 0.13% of people. And I've been pretty vocal about this, but like if you work for 14 years building a series of laundromats and then you sell that business, you will spike into this and be directly impacted in that. Like you're in that for 1 year as a function of the latent equity value that you've created over your career. That doesn't make you the 0.1% of Canadians, and it's disingenuous to pretend that it does. And so I think it's just much like the broader comment is it's consistent with a much broader concern about productivity, Canadian competitiveness, and the future well-being of this country, which I think that you have, like, I think that the social order of what we should care about is like human rights, and then is the economy growing? And I think everything gets better when the economy is growing. And so it's not, and it's getting worse, and we're falling farther behind, and none of the forecasts are optimistic. Like we're at the bottom of the G7 and we're at 16 of the G20 and going to 19. So like we got a problem, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a rant. I already got fired up.
No, I love it. And just to add some stats onto what Daniel said, like there's also fewer entrepreneurs today in Canada than there were 20 years ago, like by a massive number, which is contributing to the shrinking GDP that he's talking about, right? Like you have 1 for every 3 entrepreneurs that started a business in Canada. So the group of us having this conversation is smaller today than it was 20 years ago. And the way innovation compounds, and why, you know, when the budget came out and I went and talked to all my team about this to get their reactions and their contributions, they work in tech, young people, they love it. They want to change the world and they want to feel passionate about what they do. And they come to work every day because they feel like they make a difference, and they don't want to be in a huge, massive organization where they don't get to make a change and a difference on the world. And so if less businesses are getting funded, look, the reality is a lot of startups aren't going to work out anyways. They know that, they take that risk, but they do it to be part of changing the world and to be part of something bigger than themselves. If there are less entrepreneurs, less businesses getting funded, there's less exciting environments for people to go to work in every day. And like the tech sector compounds itself. When you look to your left and right and see people doing exciting things, it motivates me, it motivates them. If you don't look to your left and right and see that, then like the tech sector is highly mobile. People just won't do it here. Like I know the vibe when I go to Miami and San Francisco, and part of our team is based in Austin. I love being down there because the feeling you get in those cities. I've been in the startup ecosystem in Toronto for close to 20 years. I was sponsoring events when I was building a law firm practice. I got that vibe. We got that vibe going. When you do things like this, as Daniel said, right, like the compounding effect of reducing that vibe, you don't see those people to your left and your right, and you don't innovate as much.
So can we just talk about we're down roughly 100,000 entrepreneurs since 2000. And so you're like, okay, how many Toby Litkas were in that 100,000 who are now south of the border or something like that? And like, what does that mean for the GDP? That's like the obvious thing. Yeah. And that matters a lot. But then the other part of this is like, when we talk about social mobility and socioeconomic mobility, small businesses are like one of the number one ways that folks can achieve that. And so like, this is actually a huge sort of equalizer when we create more entrepreneurship, and we should be trying to create more opportunity. But the other side of that is like the innovation that we create. And so there's a reason that everybody on this thing has the same cell phone as Tim Cook. And it's because the things that are built, particularly in technology, have a deflationary effect and get deployed down. And so like a simple way to think about this is, like, I think any sane person would rather be a middle income person today than like ultra wealthy in 1940. Your quality of life is longer, your education, your opportunities, your travel, everything is better. And that's a function of the building that happens and then the deflationary impact of technology scaling and investment, right? And so I just think that this is like the most important lever for multiple reasons for social progress and socioeconomic progress for like lower middle income Canadians. So
Yeah.
and it's not always innately obvious, that like this is how social mobility happens. We're certainly a big part of the story.
For sure. And then, like, how do you build that technology? It takes a massive investment, right? And you have to have a massive market. So I want to go back to what Stephanie said about how much of her business is in the US and how much of her investors are in the US, because most of our business is in the US too, right? You're investing heavily in technology. That means you need a very large market. That means we're all competing on a global stage on everything. That means when I pay bonuses across my business to employees that are located all over the world, half in Canada and the US, people notice how much of their bonus they take home compared to the person sitting next to them. So that's the realities of what, as a CEO, I'm dealing with in my company, and how to benchmark roles in Europe, US, and Canada, and where to hire. Like, we have to fight on a global stage. We have to compete on a global stage. So like, pretending that we don't is not realistic.
Yeah, those are both great points, Daniel and Rebecca. Stephanie, anything you want to jump in on in that they commented on?
Well, I just think like all the people that I hear, all the people that I trust, all the people that I respect, I have not heard one argument as to why this is a good idea. So I don't, to have the government put this kind of, I don't know, it's just, it's a bit dumbfounding. I think you'd want to do the opposite. You'd want to incentivize people to start businesses, to create employment, to earn the reward of taking some pretty significant risk as an employee going to a startup, or as an entrepreneur starting a startup, or as an investor, putting that seed capital early in a company to let that company grow and become, a company that can compete globally. So yeah, it's just, I think it's a significant lack of understanding of business and economy and innovation, and how do we position. It's just a very reactive. And I look at the spend, I should have looked before this call, I was looking at the spend on wages with the federal government. It's like $60 billion is going on wages. Like, with all the technology that exists today, you're telling me that you need to grow people. And then so you're now creating a culture of de-risking, of comfort, of probably laziness, versus creating, a culture of like, go get it, and bring Canada on the global scale to be super innovative and create big companies that are not just always referred by Shopify and like a handful of businesses that, have more attention. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just to jump in, I'll maybe reveal a bit of sort of the cynicism, as someone who comes from a political background. I don't come from an entrepreneurial background, so I'm not like you three unicorns. I'm a little bit different in that sense. But I think just kind of the points on government, at first in terms of expanding and growing, I think that's a real concern. We at the council have been, upfront and close, seeing how a lot of these programs and different initiatives have run out or have been, sort of flown out, and they've just been extremely poor at execution, just not being able to actually deliver on, things like super clusters being downgraded to clusters. The Canadian Innovation Corporation ended up getting scrapped. Programs like SHRED, which fund $4 billion a year in terms of subsidies, turns out some of that money was still going to Huawei up until relatively recently. So a government that doesn't really understand how to sort of use the levers correctly, I think, is kind of a big challenge. And that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do at the council, is how do you help them innovate on areas like talent, customers, freedom to operate, and capital. I think, and this is maybe kind of the cynic part in all of this, is that this document actually wasn't necessarily meant to be something that led to a prosperity strategy. It really was political. It was meant to create an us versus them. And I think, Daniel, to your comment about kind of the vibes, it was designed to sort of have this soak the rich type mentality. And I think what we find so troubling at the council is that at the end of the day, when we've got the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada coming out, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, saying we have a productivity crisis in this country, break glass, we got to do something about it. That is the most dramatic language a banker from the deputy or from the Bank of Canada that you can get. Like, that's like someone screaming fire in a theater. Like, it's crazy that she said that when you really think about it. That's how measured these people are. And so for us to see in the budget that there is a tax on investment, which is one of the recommendations that the deputy governor gave to avoid, right? Figure out how to crowd in capital, figure out how to find more capital to help these firms because they're atrophying. It just speaks to a government that just, ultimately is using this as a political tool rather than actually figuring out how to grow a stagnant economy. There wasn't really a question there. That was just a rant. I had my own.
I'll add on to that then,
yeah.
Benjamin, that like what we've seen right in the UK and how they got their startup ecosystem flourishing was tax incentives for early stage businesses. And now over 60% of the capital that closes there closes through a digital platform. So like, I'm very involved in what the US is doing under the Jobs Act and how they're changing the securities legislation there. Of course, it's on a national level, so they can do that. But like to me, tax incentives are very logical. We saw that work in Great Britain. Okay, our securities law is regulated provincially, which is a huge problem in and of itself. But there are things that can be done. They're just not in this budget.
Yeah, I was part of this small group about a year or so ago to bring policy ideas. And one of the policy ideas that came is how does large Canadian enterprise are using their capital to really help sort of the innovation in Canada. And in the US, we see a lot of incentive for companies to buy locally, to invest in startups by buying their product. And we're not really seeing any of those things here being implemented, which I think would be a great way to provide more incentive for the government of Canada as a significant buyer, and also provide a tax incentive for large enterprise to buy from Canadian tech company. And if it's significant enough, at least that would be maybe one of the levers to kind of counter, hopefully, some of the things that we're seeing. But that was just, of course, it didn't make it, but that was an idea that we had come forward that we were really excited about.
Just to make sure that this doesn't devolve into just like beating up on the current government. Look, I will take a bit of the other side on these things in the sense that like, I don't think that I think SR&ED is a mess. And it's $4 billion a year, but there's a whole series of consultants around the idea of SR&ED, and they make the most of the money because it's so hard to get the SR&ED money. Like we have never claimed a material amount of capital from SR&ED, and we kind of gave up. We launched in 2017. I think that was last year we filed. And like the same is true of IRAP. And like what we actually just need to do is let the market solve these problems. And so what that means is like, we need to have some courage in our political leaders who are willing to have like some outsized financial winners and then trust that the free market is a better deployer of capital than the government. And like, I would so much rather have a Shopify exit and create 1,000 millionaires who are going to reinvest that system than have $4 billion of SR&ED, which is just kind of a nightmare to untangle. And there's so much natural conservatism to make sure it doesn't get frauded and abused and all that kind of like we actually just need to sell. I think this is actually a cultural problem in Canada at its core, in the sense that like, we just need to be a lot more like the Americans, not just in terms of like our celebration of the market economy, but also in terms of how we think about economic growth and the centrality of that. Because I don't think the government's like, there's somebody put a chart in this thing and you can look at it and like those 3 lines are like private sector, or self-employment and entrepreneurship, and that's flat. And then the private sector is like doing okay in terms of employment. And then the public sector, which we've talked about, has grown enormously. The third biggest employer in this country is the Department of Labor, which employs 45,000 people. Like, what are they doing? And so when I think about this, it's just like, we actually just need to get out of the way. The market will fix these things. It has the right incentive to fix these things, and then for those that should Google this, Matt Roberts wrote an exceptional piece on pensions in Canada. And we have like government funded all of these pensions, and they're incredible hoop and like an investor in us. And we've built these incredible institutions in Canada that I think manage like $4 trillion. They have more invested in China today than they do in Canada, right? They used to have 24% of their portfolio invested in Canada. They would not exist without Canadian help. And yet they now have 8% of their capital invested in Canada. And so I think that the government should not like tell people how to spend money, but they should support the deployment of capital by smart capital allocators into the country.
So I'll pull a couple of those threads together because some of the work that we do obviously focuses on exactly what you're talking about. And at the council, and if someone from the CCI team can throw in our shred report into the chat, go for it. I encourage it. But we put some recommendations forward on that particular program. But I think, Daniel, just to maybe push just a little bit on sort of the narrative of being more like the Americans, what I would actually say is that they have a really robust relationship between industry and government. And industry and government is domestic firms that they're engaging with. Whereas in Canada, we overwhelmingly have sort of given ourselves over to foreign multinationals, thinking that if we announce Honda plants or Volkswagen plants for the tune of billions of dollars, that we're somehow going to make us a more innovative country. And the reality is that ultimately you're actually just playing a wage arbitrage game. And there's really no difference between a banana republic and a Volkswagen republic if all you are is laborers. And that really is kind of the path that the government has now shown that they are going to go down. And I think what we find so concerning is that the government doesn't actually understand how to create wealth and prosperity. Now, to spin it back, Daniel, a little bit more into kind of what you're saying, totally agree. Government should be supporting winners. They shouldn't be picking winners, but they should be supporting them. And so as companies like the three of yours begin to show bright lights, how do we give you the capital, the talent, the customers, and really the marketplace frameworks to go out and and kill it and do amazing work? How do we make sure that open banking works? How do we make sure that data portability is a possibility? And this has just been kind of a constant atrophying. I do want to slightly pull it back to cap gains, not because I'm obsessed with it and it's the thing that I'm going to think about all weekend. Although I will, it's because folks are here to hear about it. So if we just look at it as like a very simple rubric, let's call it investors, let's call it talent, let's call it founders. Quick snapshot. What does that mean for you folks? As it looks at like how does this impact investors, maybe at seed stage? How does it impact you as a founder, and how does it impact your ability to keep the best and brightest, or to try and bring folks to Canada? One stat we like to quickly say, CCI is 2/3 of all of our computer science graduates in Canada leave. So there's already an exodus. To your points, is this the straw that finally broke the camel's back? But let's circle on that, and then we can dive into other rants on certain things about the government.
I think that Daniel said it's going to phase out a little bit, but the first reaction as a seed stage angel investor, like I write small checks, but I could deploy my capital anywhere. And so I'm going to deploy my capital where I can get the best return. And if the risk, which is already high, does not give me the same return for the risk I'm taking, I'm likely to put my capital somewhere else. So that's, I think, one point of view. Yeah, as a founder, and I've heard a lot of founders talking about like time to move your company to the US, which should be, and that was a decision when I started Tailbook. We moved from Boston. I could have built a company in the US. I decided to build it here. We felt like there was really good incentive. There's really good talent, but these are things now that are, making it less encouraging, I think, for entrepreneurs that are making that decision if they want to move in the Valley or in the US, or they want to stay in Canada, build their businesses here. And so I don't know, from an employee perspective, we haven't heard any sort of backlash yet. So I don't know if it's lack of awareness or they don't feel that they're impacted in the same way. But I think the savvy employees will definitely recognize and see, if I'm going to take this risk, I'm going to work as hard as I'm working to build this company and I'm getting penalized, is there an adjustment in salaries? We haven't seen that yet, but I could see that to be, especially if the word goes out, hopefully I didn't start a trend, but I could see that to be, to be an issue. And then it's how do we compete I think to Rebecca's point with US wages and upside benefits and things like that.
That's great. Daniel or Rebecca, do you want to take a bite at that apple?
Sure. I think, look, I work all day, every day with founders raising capital, right? Raising capital is really, really hard. It's really, really stressful. There's a couple points in people's lives when they go crazy, when they get divorced, when they lose a job, when they have kids. And I will argue there's a fourth. It's when you're raising capital. It's extremely stressful. And putting more onto a founder now, what this does is make it harder to give people a return. So all this does is put more pressure on the entrepreneurs and the founders who are out there kind of half crazy, trying to pursue a dream, trying to change the world, and trying to raise the capital to do it. If they can't raise the capital, they can't give people an innovative place to work, and that just has a compounding effect.
So, I think a couple things. So like I am a proud Canadian, and I want to build this company in Canada, and I want to see a great generation of companies built in Canada. So like I'm not leaving. And so, you know, I think, and so that's fine, right? And like it is what it is. And if this is what the democratic process selects as the right thing to do for the company or for the country, I think it's the wrong thing very clearly, but so be it. I'll live with it. But I think like, you know, the number 3 source of talent for San Francisco, like the number 3 talent pool is the Waterloo, Toronto region. And so somewhere there is a university kid who's super talented at Waterloo today. And he's saying, do I want to start my company in Canada or do I want to start it in the United States? And does the 50 to 66% marginal tax rate matter to him or her? Probably not. But like, does the idea that the US is like going the other way and getting more aggressive, and you can get like the QSBS program is $10 million in tax free, and what we're saying is we're going to tax you more. Like when you think about the future optimism that you should have as that person building in this country versus building in the United States, like that's why when I say it's symbolic, I think it's symbolic of a failure to understand how economic opportunities created for both the founders and for an economy at large. And so does the marginal tax rate matter? Probably not, but does like what it means matter? I think it matters a lot, you know, because I think it signals a pretty big drift in how the government views prosperity versus how somebody who's trying to start a company does.
Yeah, the vibes matter. That's like, I think, kind of part of the big takeaway in all of this. And right now the vibes are not great in terms of how people are obviously feeling about this. You know, sort of pulling back a little bit, you know, we've got sort of 15 minutes left. We said we'd keep it tight. It's a pulse. It's not a full long event. We're trying to keep it short just so folks can get, you know, information and hear from you. But look, you know, we've got a chance to kind of continue to engage with government and, you know, continue kind of the work of advocacy and to kind of collectively come together. You know, Dan, I think your comments about not leaving and staying, fantastic. You know, I'm in the same boats, and it's really about doubling down on what we can build here. That said, you know, an innovation policy shouldn't be centered around, you know, nationalism or around an identity of home. It should be about, you know, also what are the right policies to kind of enact and sort of move things forward as well. And so we've touched on a couple of them, you know, Dan really kind of like laying out the, you know, kind of free market, supporting winners approach, but other things, you know, that are out there that the government should be focusing on. You know, the council will continue to fight like hell on obviously this issue. But, you know, what are the other things that we begin to kind of, you know, pull together?
I mean, I said it, I do think providing tax incentive for large Canadian enterprise to buy from Canadian tech would be, or Canadian businesses, it doesn't have to be tech, but you know, we see a lot more spend with US software providers than Canadian software providers when it comes to spend with large Canadian enterprise. And so starting with the government and how they're purchasing, I do think creating that sort of tax incentive would drive the type of behavior. And then, you know, you add more logos to these startup tech companies, you give them the revenue, they build better product because you're giving them feedback, you know, they can raise capital because they're getting the customer base. And I think that sort of would significantly accelerate some of the, you know, some of the economies and some of the investment in tech. So that's something I at some point, if I have time in my life, I'm going to go and lobby because I think it's that important. Just the impact of the spend of large enterprise that they can have on our economy is massive. And it's often, so for whatever reason, it's not really considered, or it's not considered as important as other things. I think it's actually the biggest impact we can have in Canada.
Yeah, no, great point. And one of the things we worked on this year was meant to be the year of procurement for us, is a big procurement proposal for the government called Buying Ideas. Danielle, open banking. I've seen questions come in on that one. I don't know if you want to go down that path. You don't have to. No one's twisting your arm, but
no, it's fine. Look, I actually think it's important and also symbolic. So we have very clearly an oligopolistic tendency in this country across both telcos and banking. Okay. Let's talk about where we are in banking for a second, because I think this is all part of the same thing, which is we as Canadians pay the highest bank fees in the world. It's like $685. If you have wealth in this country, you don't really pay bank fees if you have more than 5,000. So the lion's share of that thing is borne out by folks who are lower and middle income. Half this country is living paycheck to paycheck. There's an economic metric called the Lerner Index. And it basically looks at like the supply demand curves of a market and says, does the price move as they should? And then it comes up with like a number. And they use this to measure like how effective markets are. And I probably looked at 50 countries on this Lerner Index. And the only country that I've found with the less competitive banking market is Qatar. Look at Russia, Argentina, every country in the G20, so on and so forth, right? And so that washes through to, I think, a marginal tax, particularly on lower and middle incomes Canadians. And it is very hard to start a business in this country, particularly if you're lower income. Like, it's a big risk. It's a luxury for a lot of people to be able to start. And if you look at the math, the majority of Canadians should retire with 30 to 50% more wealth than they otherwise would, or they should retire with that much more, and they will not as a function of bad financial products. The Canadian banks are 50% more profitable than the US banks on a return on equity basis. Like, that is coming off the back of Canadians. That's a zero-sum game, right? And so when we talk about, so now let's like talk about our story. And to be clear, I make no excuses. It is my job as an entrepreneur to figure out how to make this business work in whatever regulatory environment or tax environment or anything else. Like, and if you're not willing to accept full responsibility for the environment you're operating in, I don't think you're a real founder, right? Like, you got to figure it out. That being said, we were, I'd say until 2021. And at this point, my guess is we probably had 600,000 or 700,000 accounts. We we're probably doing like 10 billion in annualized throughput in the business. The first time people would add funds to their Coho account, it would fail 25% of the time because there was no place for us to play, right? Like, that is a broken payment engine in any sense of the word. And if you compare that to folks in the UK or the EU or the United States, particularly in Europe, folks were going from getting a payments license in 9 months and a full bank license within 15 months. Okay. So what does that mean in terms of their folks' ability to go and raise capital and do all these things that then let them go on and build real businesses, and then also make banking services cheaper and more competitive, and all the things that happen when you have a functioning economy. So like, that's the path that we've chosen in this country. We have been talking about open banking for 10 years. It started being studied in Ottawa in 2017. And it's like, this is a pretty easy one, which is like, who owns the data, the customers or the banks? And we've been talking about it. Like, there still isn't a thing that says this is how open banking will work in Canada. And it's been talked about in the budgets before, and it's being talked about in this one. Same thing with the real-time rail. And so, which is, for those that aren't familiar with this, it's just like a way for non-banks to directly connect to the payment infrastructure so that 1 out of 4 transactions doesn't fail. So like, you can map that through to telcos, you can map that through to banking, you map that through to multiple industries. And so these are part of the reasons that it is harder for these companies to raise capital, and it's harder to have social mobility, and it's harder to have prosperity as a function of like us preferring oligopolies. And so, yeah, like, I mean, again, we make no excuses. It is what it is, but it's, I'm probably the only part of my life that I am cynical in is that we will see real open banking in this country. Like, I just don't care.
Yeah. I was cautiously optimistic for years, but I am no longer cautiously optimistic in terms of key messaging on this one. I'm a bit of a grumpy cat, to be real.
By the way, I want to say one more thing on this, because I think there's an industry called the Canadian Bankers Association, and this is the lobby group of the Canadian banks, and it drives me crazy. You all can go look at this, and there's like an 11-page document that says we're supportive of open banking, and then it's like the first page is like open banking is great, and then there's 10 pages of all the shit that could go wrong. And it's just like the most disingenuous sort of muddy the water, drag our feet type of argument. And we as a community, CCI, Paytex, whatever, have not done a good job of clearing the water for Ottawa so that they understand the downstream implications of these kind of things. Like, part of this is on us. And we got to do a better job of like helping Ottawa understand the drag and what's happening to everyday Canadians as a function of this.
Yeah. No, look, I think, the need to organize, the need to come together to help explain to government what this means is mission critical. And we as an organization, have been really working in certain areas to try and do that. I think open banking is a great example of that, Dan, that more of it needs to be done. It needs to be permeating more MP offices, more ministers, more civil servants, because when they begin to see what is actually possible, that's how you begin to kind of move the needle. So no, like, look, that's a great thing to push back on us as a community. I'll have more fun facts in a couple of minutes about what are we going to do, where does the movement go next in terms of how we get people engaged and kind of animated. But Rebecca, I'll pop it up to you as well, just in terms of, okay, capital gain sucks, vibe sucks, but what do we do?
Yeah, I'll just add, I'm a grumpy cat on that one as well, because we were in the real-time rail pilot program and we put forward an excellent proposition of how we would have used that data safely and reliably. But at the end of the day, after a couple of years of effort, I was told, look, Interact's going to take this over. It's owned by the big banks, and that's how we're going to do it. Now I have payment rails that process investments from investors all over the world. And I will tell you, to support Daniel's point, like the rails for Canada are so off base from the way you can easily transfer funds in other countries. It's bonkers. Like, it's so much harder to make a simple payment transfer in Canada than it is in any of the other countries we support. Okay, so on a positive note, what can we do to fix it? I think further to what Stephanie said is a great idea. And I think tax incentives for early stage investment, that's how Great Britain did it. It really works. Get people excited about the ecosystem, get them talking about early stage investments, get them supporting each other. My investor base has been a huge advocate of Dealmaker, putting deals on the system. That's how we got to where we are today. The angel ecosystem in the US is like trillions and trillions of dollars. It outscales Canada's by a population pace of like vast multiples. So if we can get everybody working together a little bit more, like the way Stephanie said, government buy from Canadians, like individuals invest in Canadians, use the product, the whole consumer ecosystem of tech products will scale better.
No, that's great. And look, there are some real kind of tangible pieces that we can work on. I do smell maybe a new budget submission from CCI based on some of this open banking conversations. So if I pepper you for a consultation, my apologies. But that, definitely see that, kind of in our horizon. Look, we've only got kind of 2 minutes left, and I did tease people we would offer them an opportunity to get engaged and be part of, what comes next. First things first, CCI is doing another event next Friday with Brett House and Vaz Bender about the economy and what this means in terms of kind of the overall scale. We're also going to be sending out an email to folks, letting them know to call their MP, to call actually individuals that are responsible for this. And the call is really to talk about your story, what you're experiencing, and letting them know what this vibe and the fact that the vibes are off is all about. And those who are Gen Z and don't know what a phone call is, it's something where you pick it up, press the numbers, and then call them and then tell them what you're feeling. So texting and email is good, but phone calls
Which I would add that this should not be the way, by the way.
No, but the thing is that politicians and constituency offices, like when 5 reasonable people call your office about an issue, you think the world is on fire because everyone sends an email, everyone sends, a tweet or a LinkedIn post, and everything kind of just gets aggregated. But if you have a thoughtful person saying, hey, I'd like to speak to my MP, here are the issues. Oh, could you get them to call me back? Yeah, I run a company in your riding. We employ X number of people. Or, hey, I'm a highly skilled worker that moved to this country because I thought X, Y, and Z was happening. So we'll be sending some stuff out. We'll be doing another event. Sign the letter, share the letter on social platforms if you haven't, because this is about growing a movement. It's about adding more people into it. And look, capital gains is just one piece. This is about how do we take back an ecosystem. This is about how do we build prosperity. This is about how we actually get open banking. So thank you, the 3 of you, for joining us. I'm going to be candid. I would wish that you would actually all run for office because you sound smart and thoughtful and caring. However, I also don't wish that on you as well because you do seem thoughtful, caring, and insightful. Thanks, folks, for joining us. And until next time, keep fit and have fun. Is that a fun Canadian thing? Yeah? All right. Bye.
To the moon.